What makes an empty glass jar so hard to put in the recycling bin? Most kitchens hide a cabinet jammed with empty pasta sauce and jam jars waiting for a second life. Published on 31 July 2026, Vox's reporting looks past the quirky charm of this common habit to ask what actually drives it. The impulse to save a perfectly good glass container feels like a small victory for the environment and personal thrift. But the underlying question is a bit more uncomfortable. Does this stockpiling actually help the planet, or is it just a psychological comfort blanket for an age of overwhelming waste? Written by Rachel Kurzius in Vox, narrated for Arva. Ooh, a jar, a tiny little jar. The overlapping voices of the popular social audio say in a hushed, awed tone, evoking an intrusive thought. Keep the jar with the other jars. The glorious burden of stockpiling little glass jars. Will I ever use this pickle container again? Probably not. Should I recycle it? Absolutely not. That jar is my son. Jess Lynch, an artist in Toronto, made the audio on a whim. Among her friends, she's known as the one whose dishwasher is always filled with jars. Not just any old jar, mind you. Lynch has standards. It's gotta be a solid mason jar, she said. It's gotta have a lid. Other qualities that make a container worth keeping? A good seal, watertight, completely see-through, no sticky labels. If it doesn't meet her standards, it goes straight to recycling. Still, she savors the chance to take a container for another spin. I love reusing, Lynch told Vox. Why would I go to the dollar store and buy to-go cups that have to go in the garbage when I could take my little pasta sauce jar that I picked out from dinner last night and fill it up with a little savvy bee? When other people started using the clip as a soundtrack for showing off their own jar stashes, she realized she had struck a chord. The community of collectors is legion. More than half of American grocery shoppers reuse their glass containers, according to an eco-focus survey commissioned by the Glass Packaging Institute, GPI. 19% reuse them for food storage, 14% repurpose them for tasks such as organizing and crafting, and another 20% reuse them and then recycle them later. Meanwhile, about 30% choose to recycle them immediately after use.
Whether you reuse it 100 times or throw it in the recycling right afterward doesn't affect how recyclable the glass is, per GPI President Scott DeFife, because the material is endlessly recyclable. People who stockpile jars, bottles, and other containers often hold on to them with some glorious intended future purpose in mind. What once held store-bought pasta sauce could stow lentils, leftovers, or that pickling project you're definitely about to start. Perhaps all of those glass olive containers could become a set of chic matching centerpieces for a dinner party you throw down the line. And there's nothing better to hold a propagating plant stem than a buxom bottle. The container may be empty, yet it's full of possibility. The satisfaction of stashing. Monica Chavez, the content creator behind House of Esperanza, said she began saving jars when she was a kid. I come from very humble beginnings, she told Vox. We didn't have much growing up, so repurposing, recycling, and finding a use for everything was critically important. Sour cream containers held leftover food. Old coffee tins became planters. And that sensibility stuck with her, which she describes as, yeah, this is a cute jar. I am going to get the most out of it. It's that human need to make use of the things you spend your money on. Chavez will go out of her way to acquire the right container. She finds that the jar for the Rouse sauce sold at Costco, for instance, is a more useful shape than the one at grocery stores. She'll even pay a little bit more if it means she can hold on to the vessel. For example, she buys Oi yogurt, which comes in glass jars with a foil top.
I bought a set of bamboo lids, and now I repurpose those, she said, adding that the jars can store overnight oats, salsa, or other food, or be used by her daughter when she's watercoloring. Chavez has noticed companies being more savvy about packaging their products in a way so that the product can continue to live on in those people's homes, and then it kind of becomes free branding for them. If the cabinet won't close, it's time. Monica Chavez, content creator, House of Esperanza. Yoplait, the manufacturer of Oui, is definitely aware of the appeal of its container. It has an entire page on its website dedicated to jar crafts, such as wedding table centerpieces, mini topiary trees, and beauty organizers. Jam company Bon Maman similarly has a webpage filled with DIY hacks for its iconic jars with red gingham tops. Reusing your empty jars is the perfect way to enjoy Bon Maman, even after the last spoonful, it says. While Chavez has a lot of jars in rotation constantly, she also regularly culls her collection. If the cabinet won't close, it's time, she said. She'll often list them on Facebook Marketplace or in a Buy Nothing group. Let them live on somewhere else instead of immediately trying to recycle them, she said. Rachel Englehart of Trader Joe's Kitchen and Food with Heart is a big-time stockpiler who said she's currently at max capacity with her jar collection. But when one of them goes home with a friend or the lid gets rusty, there will be an opening in her cabinet for more.
She regularly puts them to use because I have to justify keeping them all in my kitchen. One of her most coveted containers to reuse is a spice grinder. If she buys one that holds, say, black peppercorns, it might end up grinding up an entirely different seasoning later. Lynch, Chavez, and Englehart all seem to actually take advantage of the various jars and bottles they stash. But for others, that's not quite how it goes. I've seen desirable jars, and I've saved them, like one-off. Sally Augustine, an environmental psychologist and a principal at Design with Science, told Vox. Only usually, in fact, always in the past, it comes to a point where I've had it for a while, and I realize I've never put anything in this jar. I think it's time for it to be recycled, and off it will go. Augustine said that many of these containers seem inherently potentially useful, but when it comes down to it, we probably actually have better options. As she sees it, jars might appeal to people's nostalgia, or folks might like the look of it, or want to believe they are the kind of person who will reuse vessels. But when those containers gather dust rather than color-coordinated art supplies or heirloom seeds, it might be time to admit defeat. You don't need an increasingly crowded shelf of empty jars reminding you of your failure to meal prep or make eye-catching terrariums. In that case, the ultimate container, the recycling bin, can relieve you of this burden. The impact of reusing jars on the planet. Even though this practice falls under the dictionary definition of reuse, is it actually helping the planet? Not particularly. Paul Ferraro, a Johns Hopkins University professor who studies human behavior and public policy, said that this kind of consumerism-sided decision-making has very little effect on the environment, positively or negatively, he said. Ferraro gets the impulse. These minor decisions make us feel better psychologically, himself included, he told Vox. But individual choices such as plastic versus glass or paper versus plastic do not matter in a meaningful way compared to collective changes in how we manage our environment, he said. It's not that these decisions are utterly meaningless, more that they're overall without significant impact, he said. If reusing jars you already have keeps you from buying a slew of Tupperware online, great. But if the hunger to acquire new and better reusable vessels has you ordering glass containers from e-commerce sites and getting them shipped overnight, you might be canceling out any of that good when you account for packaging, emissions, and manufacturing. Ferraro would not encourage anybody to waste much time agonizing over specific decisions like glass versus plastic. Worrying about whether there's an optimal choice for packaging is misplaced energy. The calculations that go into it are complicated and very variable, with little to show for it in the end. Glass has higher upfront environmental impacts than plastic, per Ferraro. Producing it is energy intensive, and it's heavier, so it costs more to transport. The concern with plastic, meanwhile, is what happens after its disposal. If it's treated as litter, it'll break down and leach microplastics into the environment. And your ability to recycle it depends on the recycling practices where you live. So, by and large, the rule of thumb is if I'm going to reuse that glass and it's going to displace other purchases that I would have made, then the glass can be a better choice, he says. But the difference is going to be tiny. Of course, it's much easier to commit to reusing containers than, say, utterly changing the way the United States manufactures products,
The latter feels a little above our individual pay grade. But if you want to do your part as an individual to stop climate change, Ferraro says foregoing a cross-country plane ride would be vastly more impactful on the environment than any of my consumer decisions throughout the whole year, he said. Ensuring your home is well insulated is another more effective choice. So if you're torturing yourself by holding on to containers you'll never use for the sake of Mother Earth, release your chains and toss them in the recycling bin. But for many collectors, it's not about that. Lynch said that she thinks of the spirit of her grandmother whenever she puts something from her jar collection to good purpose. Every time I find a new use for something that I have hung on to for a while, I feel vindicated, she said. Like, oh, I knew there was a reason I was keeping this.